Okay, good afternoon. Good afternoon. If we can have your attention, I'm going to call to order the Finance, Government, and Operations Committee meeting, which is noticed as also the Children, Senior, and Family Committee meeting for Brown Act purposes. Supervisor Chavez are here. We are both here, and we comprise a quorum of either of those committees. Today's agenda is the Finance and Government Operations agenda, traditional issue areas. So we will proceed with that momentarily. And let's just indicate that the meeting is called to order a little bit after 2 o'clock, but we're here. We're well on our way at this point. I am going to ask for just brief introductions, starting with County Council.
James Williams, County Council.
Greg Ituria, County Budget Director.
Miguel Marquez, Chief Operating Officer.
Jeff Smith, County Executive.
All right, thank you. We're officially called to order. Now we'll move to public comment, which is item 2. We have a couple cards, Scott Largent and Michael Bloomquist. You can come up in either order. First come, first serve. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Colin. Thank you. I appreciate everything you do for our county. You're a good man. Scott Largent. Good afternoon, everyone. Was in the back. I always tend to get kind of sidetracked. Most of the time I come in here, I shoot from the hip on what's kind of going on in my life that day or that week. I've been starting to read some more books. Unbroken Brain. This is actually a really good book right here. Normally, I was always a book on tape kind of guy, you know, in a way. I read your reports here, but other than that, I read car magazines and things that, you know, pertain to kind of men things, I guess, in a way. This book's been great. There was another book that I read in regards to Alzheimer's and dementia, and I had to deal with that with my grandmother. These things are very helpful in my recovery. I've got a lot of roadblocks that I deal with, and learning how to deal with things properly is very important for going forward. I had a interesting conversation with my mother out on the phone right now. They have started to get involved now. They basically started watching me. I haven't talked to my mother in 3 years. They started watching me on YouTube, and they started seeing things that are popping up everywhere throughout. You know, they were actually in New York on vacation, and they saw me pop up on a television thing, which is the most random thing, talking about fathers fighting for their rights. I mean, it's the most random thing, but it's opening that door of communication right now. Now, my mom had a stay-away order for 5 years for when I was protesting out in front of their house there in Rinconada Hills when I wasn't able to go to my daughter's birthday party. She's the one that's reached out to me now, and they're trying to figure out that path of what I have to do to be in Kalia's life. And I've agreed to therapy. It's like I'm recreating this again. I waited for the county for 3 years, you know, and even though we have Catholic Charity Services involved right now, we have the Choices for Children, it's like which one's going to hit? Which one's going to hit? And it's just, and I'm very frustrated. I was out there on the phone with my mom, and I'm like, they set something out for next week. Now we're waiting for this therapist to call, and it's like watching grass grow. It's like, when are these people going to do anything? And my little girl just turned 4. I mean, this has got to be damaging on a little girl calling out for her father all the time when she's going to see him again. I'm very frustrated with our system. I'm frustrated with visitation that just doesn't work for people. And we only offer 1 hour a week at our courts right now for people that cannot afford visitation. The other option for people that are poor is a place off of Coleman. And I'm not just here to rag on this place, but it's a dirty location. It's the low end of the mill. But when that's all you can afford, that's what you have to use. These systems now, we only have 5 that are on the visitation list right now. And they're not family therapists. And I think we do need that therapy part involved. My daughter will be damaged from not seeing me for 2 years. We need skills to learn how to co-parent, and I don't know why they're taking those pieces out of the puzzle. I don't know why they want to just divide people till the child's 18. I don't understand that. So, thank you.
All right, thank you for your attendance. Mr. Bloomquist, want to come on up?
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Blumquist. We've had some issues with the county and San Jose Water Company. There was a water tank, a non-residential use that was permitted. A building permit was issued for it. directly below our home in a vacant lot that we're trying to develop. The water tank was built on our sole recorded legal access, and in looking back at sort of the history, what happened, what didn't happen, it appears to me that San Jose Water perpetrated fraud on Department of Planning and Development and stated that they were under the exclusive jurisdiction of the Public Utility Commission. But what ended up happening was the Public Utility Commission specifically denied their request to expand capacity at that location at Overlook Station, and it's also public access to Mid-Peninsula open space. So they essentially built this water tank not just on our recorded road, a pertinent encumbrance, but on top of 3 different parcels that San Jose Water owns. And I'm pretty certain the Planning Commission at least would have required them to merge and re-subdivide those parcels. If not, there was an adjacent 2-acre parcel that could have met setbacks, one had destroyed our road, one had destroyed the view, and everything else. So they've essentially been exempted from I don't know how many tens of thousands of dollars in permitting fees, but also in tax reassessments. There was no merger or re-subdivision of their parcels, and they also haven't been taxed for the new tank, and it looks like the county does reassess other investor-owned water companies' utilities for improvements to properties. So this is probably $5 million worth of revenue or more that hasn't been invested, and there was probably $300,000 worth or more of public improvements that should have been done. It's in a very high fire hazard severity zone, state responsibility area. It's my understanding the county receives money, as well as San Jose Water does, for fire protection services in SRAs. There's fence setback violations because the parcel was so small and couldn't facilitate that, and there's no passability. It's also in an urban service area for the town of Los Gatos, so there's a number of things that have been violated here, and most recently we've had some of these issues with the grading official, Mr. Wong. He recorded a grading violation against our adjacent property for some dirt piles, and it looks like to me that was a violation of Penal Code 146 Subdivision B, in that we should have been noticed of the right to appeal that before the Planning Commission before any of this. So there's also an adjacent neighbor below us that annexed into West Valley Sanitation. There's no public service utility easements. I don't know if there's something that can be done. You know, I understand San Jose Water's got to make some money, but
Yeah, you have to wrap up, but I know our staffs have been communicating with you to some extent, and we continue to do whatever we can to help you from a District 3 office staff standpoint, you know, in terms of any unanswered questions that you have. Okay? We're not at liberty to take any other action or respond today, but I just want to let you know, and other members of the public, that have instructed my staff to continue to try to help you answer the questions you need answered.
okay, thank you.
All right. We are going to move on now to item 3, which is approval of the consent calendar and changes to the committee's agenda. We have no requests to speak under item 3, as I understand it. My recommendation, Supervisor Chavez, would be to place item 5, the audit work plan, on consent. And now that I've had a chance to take a look at it. And item 6, I've also had a chance to thoroughly look at, and I don't know if you feel like we need to discuss it, but it appears that management is in agreement with the audit recommendations pretty much across the board. If I missed something, I certainly would like to hear about that from the management side, especially since the auditor obviously led the audit. But if there's nothing anyone up here on the dais needs to discuss any further on the item, I think we can let the auditor go back to auditing and management go back to managing, and we can just put it on consent. And then item 12, I know there's a request from Supervisor Chavez's office to pull that item for discussion, which is fine by me. So that would be agreed to. And that would leave as a consent calendar items 5, 6, 10, 11, 13, and 14, with 12 coming off. Any questions about that?
That looks great. I would just want to make two comments on two different items. And one is on item 6. I just want to say how much I appreciated the attitude of the department in terms of the audit, and would be really interested in understanding more concretely how the training works. And I don't know if there's a way to do an off-agenda, at some point an off-agenda item just saying that we're doing training and we're seeing these kinds of improvements. I thought that was just really well done.
Right, we'll do one.
Thanks. And I would ask the staff at the point in time they think they have some results. And then on item 11, this is the 10-year capital improvement plan, and the only comment I had on that, and I don't think we need to keep staff, which is why, Dr. Smith, I just want to raise this with you, is that it does appear to me that once we complete the budget process, that all in, that there will need to be at some point a reassessment of the capital plan, in part because I think we're going to understand a lot more about the hospital needs. I think we're still kind of discovering what those are. And I think so, and some policy decisions relative to other locations that feed into the hospital. So the request I would like to make is that instead of waiting for an annual check-in with the committee of the 10-year capital improvement plan, I was hoping we could take a look at it at mid-year budget and put it back on the committee work plan. Only if it still looks like this, fine, just bring it back to us. But if there are changes, I think that might be the time we want to talk about them.
Sure.
Is that all right with you, Dave?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. And then I would move approval of the consent calendar.
Okay, consent calendar as amended has been moved and accepted as a motion by both members of the committee. So we will move on now to item 4, which is to receive the semi-annual report from the Social Services Agency, Department of Family and Children's Services relating to the Child Abuse and Neglect Center.
Good afternoon, Francesca Ledra, Director of the Department of Family and Children's Services.
Good afternoon.
I'm here to provide you with a semi-annual report. And I'd like to first start with the data that for the past 3 years, staff at the Child Abuse Neglect Center have answered an average of 95% of all the calls. This 95% rate has continued into the first 3 months of 2019. Our goal, obviously, is to answer 100% of the calls. However, we do have a voicemail option, and it is being used, and then there's a very low percentage of calls that are being abandoned. We had an interesting experience in the past 3 days. You may all know that at the jail, we have a toll-free number that goes from the jail to our CAN center, and so we had 107 calls from one person. And so you will see an increase of those calls going to the voicemail. So it's just kind of those anomalies that take place that you will see an increase in voicemail messages. But what we do is for every call or caller that leaves a message on the voicemail, we do in fact have someone call the person back to get the information. For those 107 calls, as you can imagine, we weren't able to get through. That was just something that happened. Since October of 2018, when the CAN social workers received advanced training on the structured decision-making assessment tools, we've been able to develop a guide to evaluate the calls to determine which calls should result in an in-person response, which should be evaluated out, and or those that are what we refer to as non-reports. We did see a slight increase in the number of evaluated outs. It rose to 8%. This is in line with the National Council of, I'm sorry, it's NCCD. It's an acronym, and National Council of Crime and delinquency, excuse me. And so it's the Children's Research Center that helps all states across California and the nation on the use of the structured decision-making tool. Our next steps will be bridging the use of the structured decision-making tool between our Child Abuse Neglect Center and our emergency response. We are also working on streamlining the information and the data flow in order to analyze the CAN reports. I believe some of you may have toured our Child Abuse Neglect Center, and you'll see that there's a marquee, and there's similar to what we have here, and we have social workers that have 2 screens. So they're operating in very different functions, bringing up information on CWSCMS, and they have headphones on. And so we're working with our TSS to be able to streamline some of that information so that it can increase the data flow and be able to categorize and prioritize the decision-making process. Supervisor Chavez, you had asked in another meeting what happens to the evaluated calls because you wanted to ensure that, in fact, they are receiving preventative services, that the Child Abuse and Neglect Center be a gateway in order to provide services. We historically have had a low number of families accept preventative services when a call comes into the CAN Center. It's a tricky situation because the family has a right to privacy. So the way that it works is that a call will come into the CAN Center. It will not meet the criteria for an in-person response. It is then sent to a differential response resource coordinator for triaging. In some cases, we will contact the family to offer services, and they have, in fact, the right to refuse. And so we need to strengthen our approach to provide those preventative services. Lastly, we are continuing our efforts to ensure that our systems are strong should there be any type of natural disaster so that we don't lose the ability to help families in need should that be a problem. Thank you. If there's any questions.
Supervisor Chavez?
Thank you. First, I would like to make a request, and that is that, is the dashboard populated every day? Like if you wanted to pull it up, you can grab it? Okay. So what I want to request is could you just start sending the actual dashboard, not a link, just send an email with the dashboard on it to the board offices, and just every day just have someone just send it.
Okay.
And that way we can just get used to looking at it. And I think your point about the 107 calls from the one person, if you want to put a little asterisk on it, that would be great. But that way it also doesn't pop up and alarm people, but it's something that people get used to seeing. The second thing that I would like to request is that on the dashboard, and I just want to emphasize for a moment how much I appreciated when you first got here, you cleaning that up, because it was a lot of information. It was good information, but it was hard. It depended on who you were as to whether or not it was actionable information. So it's been a while since I've looked at it, but one of the things I wanted to make sure we understood was of the calls in where they were triaged to. So to your point, how many of them were not actionable that go to the differential response and all the different places. If it's not ready to do that now, still send us what you have now, but I think that's going to be just really critical, because what I really want the board to start to understand is how many human beings are we talking about that are in this system on a very consistent basis, because I think some of the feedback, and I'll include myself, is that some of the feedback we give you doesn't reflect the population that we're talking about, and I want to make sure that we're very context knowledgeable as we're offering feedback. So that would be really helpful. And then on the differential response, I want to just make sure that I understand what you just said. you said two things, that people have a right to,
Review services.
yeah, no, but you earlier said a right to privacy.
Yes.
And could you raise in what context you were
Yes,
raising
I will.
that?
So originally, we had started a practice or contemplated a practice of all evaluated out referrals to send them to the contracted providers of differential response. However, we would be releasing confidential information to a second party that doesn't have a right to that information as the prospective client hasn't released confidentiality. So they must first agree to sharing of their information before we can refer them over to a differential response agency.
So when we make calls for differential, it's an internal staff person, and that's why we can do that? Because you said you have somebody who
Correct.
makes phone calls.
Correct.
So if they are directly employed by us, then we can do the differential response, but we cannot contract with somebody to do that.
If they are an employee of the Department of Family and Children's Services, as we have the authority to have that confidential information, I can call the prospective differential response client and say, this is a service. So to play it out very simply, someone calls, is concerned about me and my children. If a community provider calls me, the department would be violating confidentiality.
So, Dr. Smith, on this front, one of the big areas of discussion we had relative to prevention was to do exactly what Francesca was just explaining to us as unlawful to do. And my intent was not to expand any kind of internal service. It really was to support external services that were already existing. So I didn't want to hire 10 community workers to go out and meet the families. But what I had originally wanted us to do was to be able to take those groups that we didn't have a reason to go investigate, so we weren't going to have a face-to-face with them, get those names and numbers out to a nonprofit partner and not do phone calls, but literally go do a door check-in and not have it be from us directly, because we'd been told by a number of the people in the community that it would be a better, more well-received response if we could get a third party to go and say, we have these assets and resources. We're here to bring you bus passes. We're here to, something that was kind of a more warm expression of our concern and support than getting a call from social services saying, would you like services, for exactly the reason that Francesca just talked about. So two things to that end. One is I'm really interested in us taking a look with our county council partners to determine whether or not there is a way that we can share confidentiality with a third-party provider so that we don't have to bring in more staff, because that's was not my intent, or to get feedback from the staff about what type of worker that we already have in our system could play that role of being, for lack of a better word, sort of a community outreach worker. Because the one challenge we have is that we want to get, this is our one way of having opportunity to know that there's a family that may be in need. I mean, it's the hottest lead we have on the preventative side, rather than doing something that's more scattershot.
County Council?
We'd be happy to look into, the data sharing confidentiality restrictions. There's a lot of specific statutes in this area that impose a number of very stringent restrictions, but we can look into the specific questions.
So we can get that from County Council and then respond to the second part of your question.
If we need to,
Right.
yeah. And I would rather not, I mean, if we could do it concurrently, just so we know we have that kind of position available, because it's something,
We can do that.
I think I would be more excited about us using sort of a peer mentor approach than something more official, something less intimidating. that may be more,
I get you.
yeah, thank you. Any thoughts based on what I just asked?
No, I think a position from council would be helpful.
Yeah. And then if anybody's doing something different in the country, I don't know if there is anybody, but it'd be interesting to know if someone's figured that out. But, and I recognize we do want to be mindful of people's, privacy as well. All right. Good. Well, those were all my questions. Thank you.
Yeah, oh, great. I certainly support continuing to look at, the data sharing, information sharing aspect that you were talking about. And it wouldn't be my intent to debate it one way or the other today, but I know there's always been a question in my mind as to at what point is the county of Santa Clara, and I think Dr. Smith's brought this up in the past, sort of hold the confidentiality or the privilege versus any department within the county. And I respect, what County Council was just saying about, there's a lot of different statutes that we have to navigate in order to get to those answers. But I also know that County Council's office, especially Greta Hansen, has done a lot of work in that area in the past as we tried to navigate issues around schooling services and how much data sharing can be involved and accessible to third parties that may or may not be direct county employees, but maybe coordinators sanctioned by the county, in a school that are trying to access data zone. And then if they're accessing data zone, do we really, from a public policy standpoint, wouldn't we want them to know that there's a family that's inquired about resources, and then all of a sudden that child is in front of a school coordinator that the county has put there? And again, to flip it the other way, wouldn't we want the county coordinator to know that other action was
Connected.
that other inquiry had happened? Because maybe now you've got the family as a captive audience where you can actually start helping with that, and maybe it's a school-related issue. So, I think in general, if the law allows it and we have employees trained around confidentiality, then my own personal opinion would be we would want as much sharing as possible within the policy agenda or constraints that we've established ourselves as a board of supervisors and within these programs, so they don't get too siloed. But I get it. We've all been HIPAA trained, and we all understand, that there's a lot of rules. But I didn't want that to go without me commenting, because I think it may be important to some people to hear that both supervisors on this committee are interested in.
I appreciate
And interested in that analysis, and it may be one we have to look at from time to time. I'm not sure that one ever ends. That as laws change, we need to keep looking at it. So we are going to receive the report, right? Is that what we're doing on 4?
Yes.
All right, and that's unanimous. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you
for
for
being here.
Jessica.
5 and 6 were the audit-related issues that were put on consent earlier after checking in with staff. Item 7 is the pay equity report. I think this is essentially the second pay equity report historically that we've received or will be receiving.
Yes, that's correct, Supervisor Cortese. John Mills, Employee Services Agency Director.
Sabahat Clara, Equal Opportunity Director. Please call me Saba.
And as the committee is aware, when this annual report was agendized for the Board of Supervisors on April 23rd, Supervisor Chavez requested that the administration refer this report to FGOC for further consideration. And so, understanding that there might be questions from the committee members, we just thought it might be best to turn it back over to you and walk through the report and entertain your questions.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just say this before I turn it over to Supervisor Chavez for her questions or comments, is that it would be helpful to me to have sort of a separate sheet that was just a chronology only of what's happened or what is yet, what is still pending. Just a sort of more of almost a formatting request. Just make it easier on me is what I'm really saying, to read the reports, because I'm most interested in progress in, I know we're committed to it, and just chronologically where it is, because I think then it will trigger questions on my part in the future about is there anything we can do to support items that are still pending or pieces of this that are still out there in that context. But I'll turn it over to you, Supervisor Chavez.
So maybe my staff did that chronology, and I will make that public to you. And really, essentially, we started in September 2015. We've asked for a series of bits of information. We've gotten some of it, and not much of it, not where we wanted to go.
Okay.
And so part of my question is this something we should just get an external partner to help us do? And because, and I could go through the list of questions, but it seems like maybe people are just busy. It's not anybody's particular responsibility. My question is, do we just need help? And I could go through the list of the issues, but I don't, that's not really I don't know that would be super productive.
And I guess I can offer an observation, but I would sort of leave a more definitive answer to your question up to Dr. Smith. Just my observation as being a party to the work, which, I think as is evidenced from the legislative file and from the fact that it's originated from 3 different departments, that there are a lot of partners across the county in this work. And I think to the extent that sort of coordination of the work may be a challenge in terms of the disparate efforts that are going on across the various departments, I think there might be something to consider there, but I would leave that up to Dr. Smith.
So, Dr. Smith, let me just, again, I could go through all of the requests we've made and what's been responded to and what's not, but it does feel to me that this is one of those issues that we need one person who can kind of pull us across the finish line in terms of getting the requests of the board responded to. Because I think there are 2 different issues. I think one is an ownership issue, like whose job is it, and then the other is just an expertise issue, and we may not have that expertise in-house, and neither of those are things we can't fix.
What I would suggest is that when we report this out to the full board, hopefully at that point your staff could have a specific list of what has not been responded to that you would like, so that we can suggest that as a scope of work for an outside contractor if that's the concern.
Well, really, I was more asking, really I'm interested in your opinion about that, because I think there are just 2 issues. I think one is we need one leader of one department just to own it instead of having 3 departments respond. And then 2 is it appears to me that part of the challenge may be that we need external help, because the other thing is even within the 3 departments, we've not been able to kind of nail down how to proceed. And I think those are really 2 distinct issues. But I appreciate your point that what we can do is give you our analysis of the chronology, and then just kind of the bits that are missing, and then make a recommendation for options.
Right.
And that would be fine. We can do that. We'll take responsibility for that.
I don't want to wing it without having a scope of work specifically written down so that we can decide how to do that.
So what we'll do is we can bring this report to the full board, and then Supervisor Cortese attached to that will be a referral from this committee, from you and I, and what I'll do is my staff and I will take responsibility for taking up the first crack at that, get it to you, and then we'll attach it when this comes to the board for a direction. And that way we have direction on that if the staff has a different opinion, fine, but at least we'll have some direction and we won't have to wait another couple months for it to move.
Yeah, I'm happy to join in. Let me just ask council, if we simply, obviously the referral has just been stated, but for the two of us to memorialize the referral together for the Board of Supervisors, is that okay under the Brown Act? It doesn't matter to me in any particular way, other than I just want to make sure that Supervisor Chavez is, I'm happy stating here that I concur with the referral, and essentially the county executive is saying, you put it together and get it to the board, which I understand why. I'm not arguing that point. And Supervisor Chavez is just saying, let's do it together as the two committee members. Is that Brown Act passable, since we're just essentially memorializing a referral that's already been made in public?
I mean, I think the committee today can obviously make the referral, but if you're talking about, it sounds like Supervisor Chavez will be putting together a specific document,
Yes.
Listing out specific items. From a Brown Act perspective, it would be best to either have that be surfaced through item here at this committee, or just have her be delegated with.
Yeah,
But we could also just do a referral. So when this comes back, we'll just do a referral together, and I'll reach out to you on the referral. Because I do think, I would like your insight on it, just so I'm not representing just myself, but
Right.
Is that okay to do it that way?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for clarifying that. Anything else we need to do on the item for now?
Thank you.
All right, so that's, we will receive the report under item 7 with the understanding that separately as a referral to the Board of Supervisors, as a subset of the Board of Supervisors, she and I will do a referral under the standard referral process, indicating what further direction we would like to see as this item comes back to the board. So that takes us to item 8, and we do have a speaker on item 8. Please come on up, Susan. Why don't we go ahead and hear from the speaker, just in case he's, for any reason, in a hurry, or what he says might have some bearing on something that the administration might want to say or respond to. Doug Muirhead.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, supervisors and staff. For the record, my name is Doug Muirhead. I live in Morgan Hill. Today, I want to suggest that we need to introduce accounting for uncertainty into our planning efforts. Your sustainability plan assumes some unspecified future as far as I can see. Contrast this with the approach of MTC and ABAG in their Horizon program pre-planning effort for Plan Bay Area 2050, which is resilience in the face of uncertainty. Horizon proposes 3 possible futures, which for the sake of brevity, I will call smiley face, frowny face, and same old, same old. Where you make investments and the benefits you get as a result can be quite different across these multiple futures. The future is uncertain. Deal with it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. We'll turn now to Department of Sustainability.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Cortese, Supervisor Chavez, and members of the committee. Susan Gilbert Miller, Director, Office of Sustainability, I have with me.
Good afternoon, Susanna Mercado, Climate Change Sustainability Program Manager in Facilities and Fleet.
Chris Curry, Senior Management Analyst, Office of Sustainability.
As noted last time I was before this committee, the county has made great strides in sustainability. The progress of all these efforts can be found in the 2019 Semi-Annual Sustainability and Climate Action Report that's before you today. I'll touch on just a few of the highlights. The Office of Sustainability, or OOS, continues to move forward with the development of the Sustainability Master Plan and Management System to organize county departments and their initiatives for improved collaboration and performance. A review of county departmental programs that are positively impacting sustainability and climate defense can be found in the appendix of the semi-annual report that's before you. We continue to see the results of the Sustainability Master Plan departmental collaboration in many areas, including the new solid waste management request for proposal expected to be issued in September that was developed collaboratively with 5 county departments and is aligned to advancing environmental stewardship goal number 5, diverting 100% of solid waste from landfill. Increased collaboration is also shown by the recently issued ecology-based tree management guide for county operations, which is intended to support environmental stewardship goal number 10 to plant more trees. The tree management guide accompanies the legislative file of today's agenda item. Facilities and Fleet has received proposals for their Greening the County Fleet and Operations study, which was developed in collaboration with OOS and the Roads and Airports Department to analyze how to accelerate the implementation of environmental stewardship goal number 8 to ensure that 100% of public fleet vehicles are electric, hybrid electric, or run on alternative fuels. A part of this study will examine opportunities to implement the county's goal to become diesel-free by 33. Facilities and Fleet has also collaborated closely with OOS's Integrated Pest Management Staff, or IPM for short, on a landscape inventory and operational needs assessment that will be presented to the Hewlett Committee next week on June the 20th. With support from OOS IPM staff, Facilities and Fleet completed their tree inventories for FAF-managed facilities, and the Parks and Recreation Department has already inventoried over 4,000 trees in the developed areas of 6 county parks, with the goal of better tree management and identifying problems early on that can affect tree health. The county's commitment to using 100% renewable electricity for county operations by December 2019 is well on track. The county is currently at 75% renewable electricity for county operations, and the remaining 25% is in the process of being procured using renewable energy certificates. Other county efforts aimed at reducing community energy use can be found in the Bayrin annual report that accompanies the legislative file of this agenda item. OOS is now preparing for the external aspects of the Sustainability Master Plan with the recent issuance of a request for proposal for a Community Climate Action Plan, or CCAP for short, intended to leverage work on greenhouse gas emission inventories that have already been completed for jurisdictions within the county, and importantly, to create a relational network map to identify the key organizations and their initiatives that are geared towards climate defense regionally, so that the county can prioritize how best to provide continued leadership and support to regional efforts. Happily, the county continues its national leadership with the County Climate Coalition in partnership with former Vice President Al Gore's Climate Reality Project. Membership is now at 23 counties because at 11:55 today, Albany, New York became our newest member. Initial conversations are also occurring with the National Association of Counties, or NACO, about how the County Climate Coalition can be publicized to other NACO counties. A County Climate Coalition welcome letter is currently being issued to all members, and activities are being expanded to provide a space for counties to share best practices and collaborate on ideas for climate defense. You are asked today to receive the 2019 Semi-Annual Sustainability and Climate Action Report And before doing so, we're happy to take your questions.
Well, thank you very much for all the progress. That was great news to hear fresh off the press about the County Climate Coalition, and thank you for working with Climate Reality Project to keep the momentum going on that. I know we have an investment of some support that goes toward that, that wasn't around just a couple of years ago. And the fact that you're managing that and making sure that everybody's doing their part to keep growing it is, I think, extremely important. And, we started that off originally just asking counties to pledge to support the Paris Accords. And, of course, Al Gore upped the ante and said we need to be asking counties to do what you're doing in Santa Clara County and, to pledge to 100% renewable. So I think that's a game changer over time, and we're getting there, and it neutralizes, of course, the negative effect you get when the White House goes in a different direction. So we are happy about that. I don't even need to ask Supervisor Chavez if she's happy about that. I know she is. One question I have is on everybody's favorite topic, trees. Why? Okay, so I'm just going to be blunt and say the progress, I appreciate the numbers, I appreciate the transparency as to what we've done, how much we've done, who we're contracting with and all that. It just seems like awfully low numbers. And I would love to have you come back at some point with two things. Just, I don't think we need a consultant to do this. Just some basic publicly available information on the attrition that we're experiencing currently in terms of the urban forest, the rural forest, the tree canopy that's out there within this county versus our goal. I mean, obviously that can be broken down to those areas where we're primarily responsible, county parks, unincorporated pockets, and so forth. It seems like it was probably 9 years ago, I want to say nearly 10, where we put the 1,000 tree goal out there. I mean, I'm just saying 90 or 100 trees a year. I think one of our office, if we decided to have our office staff, plant 10 trees a month, we could exceed that 100 trees a year in 1 year. I'm not suggesting that, staff, but without opining any further on how much we should be able to do, I'm willing to hear from you, if not right now, just on a follow-up report focused simply on the tree goal, where we could get some leverage in that regard. At the municipal level, there's a little bit more land use going on, and there's opportunities to essentially, usually there's opportunities to bring tree mitigation in or tree planting goals in as sort of a condition of approval on land use, or something that's sort of soft negotiation. But that's what I mean by leverage. I'm talking about that. I'm talking about ways in which we could weave our goals around making sure we don't fall back, in terms of the environmental need around trees, that we at least break even. I want to make sure we're not losing ground. And what are maybe some of the best practices that counties and municipal governments use besides their general fund money, to get other people to do that for us where it's appropriate, or partner with other folks in terms of partnerships where we have something we can offer, like access to land, and they're willing to come in and perhaps build up the tree canopy a little bit, or just the existence of trees in the first committee on how does this goal stack up against attrition, and two, what can we do to increase the goal aside from
Go out to other potential partners. We have consistent guidance, at least within our own county operations. So it's to also leverage some of that as well.
Yeah, and I know that we've, let me just say, and without, at the risk of getting too deep, again, I don't want to be overly anecdotal either, but, you know, I had the experience in the county unincorporated area in my district of seeing somebody take out a redwood tree right in front of their house and just leave the stump there. Perhaps they should have every right to do that on private property. I'm not necessarily making a case one way or the other as to whether that was appropriate or not, but I'm not sure. It felt like the proverbial tree falling in the forest. Does anybody even know we just lost one redwood tree? If we did want to mitigate that by planting one somewhere else, how would we have known we even lost one? So that's what I'm kind of looking for in terms of noticing requirements. Let's just do whatever we can to have people surface what's going on out there, you know, without being overly regulatory. So we can now, you know, as we're doing this mapping and inventory, it can actually be kind of a living document where we're understanding where the losses are occurring and where the gains are occurring. I mean, that would be my hope long term. Not, you don't need to put all that in the report that you're coming back with, but that would be my agenda, so to speak. Thank you. That's all I had, and other than, again, thanking you for the great work that you're doing in this area. I think you really position our county to be a national leader in so many areas here. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Supervisor Chavez?
Thank you. And I just want to echo what Supervisor Cortese just said. I think this is very exciting. I'm curious, Doug raised an interesting point, and I'm wondering, have you seen the Horizons, is it 2040? Or I can't remember. 2050. Have you seen the document he's referring to?
I'll have to look into that. I haven't.
So I would recommend that not only you look into it, but they're still taking input because they're still framing this discussion, and I would really encourage you to look at it. Here's the thing I found fascinating about it. In general, we in government try to be as transparent and precise as we can be about all kinds of things, numbers, and even when you look at this report down to how many tonnage of tree corpses we have laying around. So, I mean, which I appreciate. The thing that the report did, and I think you saw this too, is that the report takes the scenarios that we may be looking at in the future and helps us think about how to plan in reaction to any number of scenarios. And at first it was a little disconcerting because I actually like ranges, but they were kind of extreme. Like one is, you know, we're all going to heck in a handcart, and the other is we're going to leave, we're just going to assume that if we do everything we're doing, that we're going to go down a bad path, but maybe not quite as bad. And then the other is that there's this kind of more average scenario. But what it allowed me to start thinking about was actually something that that we ended up doing a referral on relative to emergency response, because as part of that, they projected out what our regional response could be in the event of a specific kind of natural disasters for us to be able to respond. And what was interesting to me from looking at that was that the response times, the rebuild opportunities consider businesses that will not move from here. It doesn't consider the implications of the kind of industry we have today. And so they made an assumption that it would, if we could build these businesses back over the next 5 years, that the same businesses would come back, which isn't true. It's just not even a realistic thing. But then it got me thinking a lot about how we think about our response to climate change and how aggressive we need to be at a local level. And what's particularly impactful about this is that it should be driving other policy decisions we're making relative to, you know, park land and our habitat conservation plan and our ag plan, and it still feels to me like those things are pretty disconnected from each other. They may not be. I mean, they may be in all of your heads in terms of how you're thinking about the work, but it's not clear to me when we're discussing each of these that we have an understanding of what problem we're trying to solve and how the investment in that problem helps how the investment in that situation helps address the main problem we're trying to deal with. So in any case, it's really worth looking at the planning, because I think it's an interesting way of planning, you know, just something for us to think about. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
If I can just add on, I certainly would value that being looked at by the county, probably not just the Office of Sustainability either.
Oh, yeah, it's a good point.
It always strikes me when we see those kind of forecasting reports and where they tie resiliency in, that they're very municipal government oriented, meaning it's often about how do we replace the residences, how do we replace the commercial properties. When you think about the business of the county, there's really no discussion about the resiliency of the health and hospital system here, and what happens right now if we are and we're morphing into disaster relief a little bit, but that's what Horizons, that's what the reports in part do, say, well, to your point, everything goes to hell in a handbasket, then something that could happen because of disaster. I'm quite sure that Dr. Smith and a whole bunch of people have plans for that, but they're not uploaded into the regional plan because it's very dominated, I think, the thinking by traditional forecasting that's been done around 101 cities and not the book of, of business that the counties do. So, not to get too off the subject again, but, people who were in the thick of it back in the day of Katrina, and I know we've had many disasters since then, but talk to me about the psychological, the mental health resiliency that was needed and wasn't always present and wasn't available to be treated, and the closures of hospital rooms and so forth, having a huge impact on what people were able to do in every other aspect of their life, including just trying to put Visqueen over their roof or not, or getting off the roof and getting into a boat. So I think your office is, I agree with Supervisor Chavez, is one office that should definitely be taking a look at what they're saying, because a lot of it is anticipating sea level rise as the disaster, but they're also taking into account other major disasters, again, without really having the advantage of your input, basically. And I think that's in part your point.
Yep,
right?
that's exactly right.
Yeah. Anything else?
No, thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. So item 8 is well received unanimously. Item 9 is intergovernmental relations. Thank you for looking at this. This is a report back on Assembly Bill 857 related to public banking, and the report's somewhat self-explanatory, I guess. I can't remember who asked for this. It might have been Supervisor Chavez and I, or one or the other of us, by referral originally.
Yes, Danielle Christian, Legislative Manager. The two of you had a referral at the board meeting of April 23rd. You had a two-part referral. One was options for a position on AB 857 by Assembly Members Chu and Santiago. The second part of your referral is referenced in the report, and it was a legal analysis, a policy analysis, and I believe maybe an implementation analysis, which in your legislative file is referenced that if this bill were to be chaptered, the second part of your referral would move forward and staff would start working on information on that part. But what you have here today is a report on Assembly Bill 857, along with a recommendation. I can go through a little bit more information, or I can entertain questions to the best of my ability.
Well, we see the neutral position recommendation. Let me ask this, in maybe you can respond, Danielle, or others. It seems to me that the justification for a neutral position, as I read this, was more with regard to, I'm not sure if we would want to implement this, as opposed to a more traditional support oppose, you know, are we okay with the legislation going through and creating an option? And where I was tending to fall, and I'm just trying to make that distinction because it's, you know, it seems to me that I could say, I could recommend to the Board of Supervisors, or the committee could, look, the bill is fine in terms of creating the option. There's nothing in the bill that's in and of itself putting any mandate on the county. If subsequently we want to take up a discussion as to whether or not we want to do something, if the bill's signed into law, then we got to come back to this implementation discussion, which is a little more, you know, which has some pitfalls in it and some concerns in it, constitutionality and a lot of things.
Right.
But I didn't know if our staff felt like those issues, those implementation obstacles or concerns are so big, you know, that the bill should be amended to take those into account. And if that's the case, then I would rather go back to Chu and Santiago and say, we're not just neutral, we're saying we could support the bill, but you would have to address, you'd have to amend or address these concerns that we have, and if, in effect, send them the memo.
Sure.
I can probably jump in on that. From a staff perspective, the reason we suggested a neutral opinion is because there are a lot of details that aren't spelled out in the bill that would need to be addressed. So if what you're saying is, could we come up with a list of details or amendments that we think would be clarifying and appropriate, we can certainly do that.
So just to follow up on that, I think, you know, one of the interests that, I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to make sure we took a position on this was in part based on discussions that we'd been having about just how expensive it is to bank and, you know, all the other challenges that we're having, bonding, paying for our own money to come back to us. I mean, all of that. And so I think part of the reason the bill is structured the way it is that the authors are getting a lot of pushback from the banking industry, who doesn't want us to have more independent banks, but wants to force us into really a no choice, because the credit unions for the most part aren't large enough to partner with us unless they get into some kind of collaboration, and there are limits to what the credit unions are even allowed to do, which means that a big part of how banks make money off of us, we really can only go to banks. So I say all that because I think that what we should be saying is that we want local government to have the option of creating banking institutions that allow us to save the public money, and that the amendments we're most interested in seeing are blah, 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 and blah. And really, in some respects, based on feedback I got from you, is partly why I wanted to bring the bill forward, because I thought you raised some good points around the limitations that we had right now, that separate of creating another option, we're just kind of stuck. And so I think we want to be a little more proactive.
So do you want us to come back to the subcommittee with a suggestion of amendments, or
I'm curious,
bring it to the full board when it gets reported
Well, I guess what
out?
I'm curious about is, based on your reading of this and this discussion, what do you recommend that we do as next steps? I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, I think if the committee wants to proceed to a point where we can support, we should probably draft up a set of amendments or additions that we think would be important for implementation, because there's a lot of question marks there in the current bill. So, and then come back to the full board maybe when this gets reported out, as giving the board the option to either support with amendments or take a neutral position or do whatever the rest of the board wants to do. But we just didn't feel from a staff perspective we could tell the board that we should support it without the amendments.
And is of these issues, the issues that you're most concerned about are what for you? I mean, you as the fearless
Liability
leader.
concerns.
And so and I think that's something that I think the banking industry is trying to put as many roadblocks in this as possible. And on the liability, I mean, I think what was interesting to me about that is the idea that you would need a constitutional, even the idea you need a constitutional amendment, to me is sort of framed from the banking industry's perspective that there's a lot of safeguards for them to protect their market share. And so, yeah, so I think it would be important to get your, really some clear support, I mean, a clear direction with a support to amend. And then if you feel like the amendments are too overwhelming, I would still like to be able to send a letter of encouragement, because we do want them looking at this. We need them to not feel afraid to look at this, and we need to provide enough support to them, to these particular leaders, to do that. And I would also say the folks that are authors on the bill are all folks who've been very active allies of local government, and so I think they would also be very open to understanding what we think it would take today for us to be active in that.
We'll do that.
Are you comfortable with that, Dave?
Yeah, sorry, going back to my opening comment, I don't think, the way I read the bill, there's nothing in it that mandates or requires us to do anything. So I think, what could happen with a bill like this is it could get signed into law, theoretically, with or without amendments, and then nobody can implement. It could be just, there's, local governments throughout the state just don't do anything because there's concerns about liability, there's concerns about particular aspects of implementation, which to me would then keep the ball, alive, keep the ball up in the air. I don't want to mix metaphors, in a good way, because it would force the legislature to come back, if indeed they were committed to this, whether it's Chu and Santiago or subsequent authors, and say, let's fix this up so it can actually be implemented now. Meaning, I'm really holding the implementation piece separate from, getting to a place where, and I think this is similar to what you're saying, Supervisor Chavez, where basically there's been a throwdown, on whether or not the legislature is committed to creating a public option. And once you can break the ice on that, I think, subsequent legislation or rulemaking or something could start cleaning up how you actually do it. So it would be my desire, and if this is consistent with your saying, Dr. Smith, for you to come back, with something that says support with amendments. In effect, I don't want to try to take too much of a shortcut here, but basically the work that's been done in this memo could be provided to the authors as the concerns and amendments that we're looking for. I don't really have a problem with that. They may not do it. They may not do any. The bill may die. It may go forward without any amendments. But it would be, if we're just interested in saying we'd be good with it if you can resolve these issues, then why don't we just say that? Just attach the memo in effect as the requested amendments. So that's what I would recommend. Obviously, you can come back with that or whatever options you want to the Board of Supervisors, but I think that's what the committee's looking for, something along those lines.
Danielle wanted to jump in.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask for clarification on where to take the proposed amendments, because there is a timeline that the legislature is working on, and so returning to the Finance and Government Operations Committee.
No, it's got to go to
not...
the Board of Supervisors.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
For urgency.
And thanks for that heads up.
Thanks for clarifying that. Okay, so that's the consensus of the committee, and I think that allows us to move on from item 9 today and continue on to item 12. Thanks, Danielle. 12 is the Emergency Management Overview Report. Emergency management is a hot topic. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. It's a big topic these days. Supervisor Chavez, I know you wanted to pull it for some specific questions, so I'll
Yes,
defer.
thank you. Well, I thank you both for, I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourselves before I start asking questions.
Dana Reed, Director of Emergency Management OEM, and with me today is my Deputy Director, David Flam, who will be providing the overview. I want to thank both Supervisor Cortese and Chavez for having us here today. So we'll get started if that's okay, and then we'll be here for questions.
Great.
The clerk of the board, bring up the small slide deck, please. Thank you.
So I'll just start by saying that I'm going to be as succinct as possible. I was actually quite pleased that this item came off of consent because I'm very passionate about the topic and enjoy speaking to it. While I am as succinct as possible, I will say that I'll probably spend the most amount of time on slide 1 to provide a little bit of narrative context to the conversation. And on slide 1, what you're going to see when it comes up is a list of dates and disasters, which is never super fun to look at. And this is a very busy slide, I'll just say right off the bat. But to speak to it broadly, what you see there is a timeline for the emergence of the career field of emergency management. Starting in a 1950s civil defense era, when we were primarily concerned with a national Khrushchev era threat. Over time, what we've seen is an evolution towards a greater recognition of concern of natural disasters for local governments and an emergency management career field that has evolved with that recognition. A number of disasters, many local, and you'll see there, the ones in blue are state and red are national. From the Oakland Hills fire, which that really was the impetus for the state's standardized emergency management system, all the way through more recent events like the Lake County fires and the Sonoma County Thomas fire down in Ventura and Santa Barbara, and even more recently, the Butte County fires. Our office has played in some small part, role in some of the more recent events, and to include some of the national events. You may recall we deployed folks to Hurricane Florence in North Carolina this year. I was fortunate enough to be on that group of people. The reason I show this slide is not just to highlight the evolution of emergency management as a career field, but also to talk about the pitch of what emergency management is. I can tell you that in my nearly 20-year career, I've been asked, what is emergency management? Because people have a lot of misconceptions about who we are and what we do. And in my time, having dealt with many of these disasters, going back to pre-Katrina and responding to Katrina to modern day, I've come up with a little bit of an elevator pitch. And ultimately, what I'd like to say is every department in local government reduces some exposure to risk. Some are obvious, some are a little less obvious. Fire departments reduce exposure to risk of structural fires and medical emergencies, police departments to civil disorder, and some are a little less obvious, like finance departments, which reduce the exposure to risk of poor money management. Planning departments reduce the exposure to risk of poor land use planning. Our county has a LGBTQ department, which is not common across the country. We've taken a very progressive and I think an amazing stance on that. We recognize that there is a population that, if not effectively advocated for, could expose that population and the county to risk. So we've created a department that advocates for that population. Our office, the exposure to risk that we reduce is the exposure to risk of poor interoperability amongst all of those various departments. The people that work in those departments all come from very different backgrounds, all have very different ideas of the world and see the world through different professional lenses and speak about it in different ways. In that way, we become the Rosetta Stone for local government in time of disaster during the preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation phases. We like to say we reduce the Tower of Babel effect to local governments capabilities to coordinate during a time of disaster. If we can go to the next slide. Do I have the, oh, there it is. Thank you. This slide here paints the picture of where emergency management fits in the incident management structure. Starting at the bottom, you've got your incident responders, our firefighters and police officers who respond to the scene of an incident. They focus on a very tactical-oriented approach to disaster management. Above that, you've got your department operations centers who manage the resources of their specific departments, moving those resources amongst various incidents. Their role is operational. They're directing resources amongst incidents. And then you get to the Emergency Operations Center. I spoke to our role being the Rosetta Stone and reducing that Tower of Babel effect. The way by which we do that is we provide a common language. That language you can see there is our guiding doctrine, the National Incident Management System, Standardized Emergency Management System, the Incident Command System, and our Emergency Operations Plan. We then provide a place where people can speak that common language, which is the Emergency Operations Center, and then we give them a process by which they can set collaborative goals and objectives in a time of disaster to expedite our ability to support the field and ensure the continuity of government services. So our goal really is strategic coordination of the various departments that work in this county and serve the people of this county. Above that, you can see the policy advisory groups. Ours is the Disaster Preparedness Executive Committee. We also have the Emergency Operational Area Council. Those groups help us in establishing, advising us on policy direction for the various departments via the strategies that we come up with in the Emergency Operations Center. And then obviously your role as the elected official in supporting all of that below you, a burden that I know sometimes comes with quite a bit of weight. And you oftentimes support us through the financing issues, through getting public support and helping educate the public on the role of local government in time of disaster and establishing ordinances and laws where necessary. On to the next slide. So this is our office. This is unfortunately, what I think is a very contrite view of the amazing people that serve us. They don't fit in those little boxes, I'll tell you. But this is a pretty good roadmap to understanding who we are and how we do what we do. Our office is broken up into a few primary sections. Our grants management section, where we manage several $1 million of grants for emergency management improvement, capability improvements, homeland security capability improvements, where we we disseminate grant dollars to emergency response agencies to all the various jurisdictions within our operational area, within our county. We also have a public risk communications officer who focuses on public information campaigns for preparedness, who helps in disseminating crisis communications in times of disaster, or even just recently with the heat, was putting out information about personal preparedness and awareness about the concerns over heat. We then have a planning section which focuses on writing our emergency operations plan, our foundational plans, if you will. The plan for response, our emergency operations plan, our hazard mitigation plan, which focuses on hazard mitigation, imagine that, our recovery-based plan, and our preparedness-based plan. Under each of those plans is a number of annexes focusing on our hazard-specific concerns and our function-specific concerns. Examples of hazard-specific concerns: flood, earthquake, wildfire, so on. Function-specific concerns would be mass care and shelter, cost recovery, donations management, volunteer management, those types of things. Going a little further, our training exercise program focuses on obviously disaster exercises and bringing in a number of trainings that help increase the competency of our emergency operations center staff and incident management staff and help them receive credentials that have been established statewide to increase the competency of emergency management across the entire state for local emergencies and events where we would send mutual aid staff. We then have our EOC operational readiness folks. They focus primarily on the systems in our emergency operations center that allow us to coordinate and communicate with our other emergency operations centers and our field staff, and then up the chain up to our elected officials and across jurisdictional boundaries. And then we also have our CERT staff, which are county fire employees, focusing on the CERT program within the county fire service area. So that's the general overview of our office organization. I will add that we were just approved for a hazard mitigation analyst to work in our grant section to take advantage of the many grant dollars that have been made available through Governor Newsom and FEMA for mitigating our exposure to risk. And I just want to point out real quick, a moment ago you had the Office of Sustainability here, and we've worked with them quite a bit on reducing our exposure to risk and looking at long-term sustainability goals through the mitigation grant dollars and mitigation planning efforts that we have. So, we're tied in with that office quite a bit as well and looking at those, at the supervisor's goals towards sustainability. This slide here, I find can be a bit of it can give you that brain freeze if you don't have a bit of a context to walk through it here. We call this our office compass. The compass points to what we do during mitigation and preparedness to ensure we're ready for response and recovery. The bottom half of that sphere is the response and recovery phase. The top half is our mitigation and preparedness. The partners at the county, operational area, regional, and professional for our profession are the various stakeholders that we work with to ensure that we've set effective mitigation priorities, we've prepared effectively, we've written our plans, we've done the things we need to do to make sure the things on the bottom in the tactical, operational, strategic, and advisory support roles can effectively execute when they're needed, which is hopefully not very often. Next slide. Our primary role is to ensure the effective implementation and execution of the incident command system, the state's emergency management system, the national incident management system. We have two roles, we wear two hats. We have to coordinate as the operational area lead, but we also are the primary emergency operations center to support the unincorporated areas of the county. So we wear those two hats, and I think we do it fairly successfully. We also assist in mutual aid coordination. While there are primary mutual aid channels for what we call the lights and sirens resources, we also coordinate mutual aid for the emergency management resources, the uncommon resources, if you will, needed in disaster, EOC staff, things that you wouldn't think you might need in a time of disasters to ensure continuity of government services. We do resource adjudication amongst jurisdictions based on needs. We're the conduit to the state for governmental needs and issues during time of disaster. We help ensure crisis communication through the Joint Information System and the planning for the use of the Joint Information System and the potential activation of a Joint Information Center, should we need that, for all the PIOs, public information officers across the county, amongst the various agencies and jurisdictions. We help ensure continuity of government through COOP planning and through the use of our Emergency Operations Center in all sorts of types of issues. Some are less intuitive. Even labor issues we might have the EOC activated for to ensure we're addressing all the continuity of government issues that might have to happen in those types of events. The final bullet really speaks to it. We're there to ensure that we're increasing the capacity to manage emergency events, any size or type, planned or unplanned. Next slide. Here's a list. I'm not going to go down the list, but a list of real-world events and incidents that we've been involved in. And this is really only a sample. There's probably, I don't know, a dozen more that could be listed in there that were smaller or more unique events. We've either hosted these and managed these locally and taken a lead role in these, or we've deployed folks to participate in these events. And I will say that as we deployed and as the county supervisors have supported the deployment and the support to neighboring jurisdictions and jurisdictions that aren't even in our state that have needed assistance and have asked for assistance, we've brought back way more than we sent in the form of lessons learned, best practices that will inform our documents, our plans, our processes and procedures. I certainly, having been one of those assets that you've deployed, have learned quite a bit and have brought that knowledge back so that we, one, don't make similar mistakes, don't leave money on the table, don't let we reduce the potentiality of damages and risks and lives lost, and ensure the greater success of the coordination of our entire incident management enterprise within this operational area and county. Next slide. I think that might be the last slide. Yep, that's it. So with that, I think we're ready to receive any questions.
Supervisor Chavez.
Thank you. I really appreciate the report, and and the framing that you are giving us to take a look at this. A couple of background questions, and then I want to talk about current work in the future. So here's a background question. As it relates to the relationship in particular with the CERT teams, and those are all volunteer organizations across the county, how many of them are there countywide?
So it's kind of a difficult question. Certain jurisdictions have designated jurisdiction CERT teams that are organized and promoted by that jurisdiction. Other jurisdictions might have kind of ad hoc neighborhood by neighborhood based community emergency response team organizations. Each jurisdiction has lead representation for their CERT functions, and that takes also different forms and shapes from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Speaking on behalf of our CERT staff, that our county fire department employees that manage the training of CERT teams within the county fire served area, those jurisdictions, there's some commonality to the organizational structures generally on those teams. Outside of the, I think, 7 jurisdictions that county fire serves, thank you, it becomes a little less consistent. There's some consistency between some neighboring jurisdictions like Sunnyvale, Mountain View.
Ballpark. I'm just curious.
I'd hate to say 15 because there's 15 jurisdictions, because as an example, San Jose might have broken their one jurisdiction team into multiple neighborhood teams.
So let me just drill down about why I'm asking the question. Dr. Smith has one of his, I don't know what Steve Preminger's title is.
Director of Strategic and Governmental Affairs.
Okay. So one of the issues that he has raised, I know he's raised this with you as well, is how do we take a look at the CERT structure to try to, frankly, get deeper into communities that, so that for lack of a better word, I think it's really building the infrastructure, irrespective of the city people are in, to be able to look out for their own areas and for themselves a little bit better. And personally, one of the things I'm really trying to get away from is the thought that people have that somehow government's going to just stand no matter what and I'm going to be okay, and really getting people to think, okay, if I have to take care of myself and my family for 3 days, what does that look like? And if I have to take care of myself and my family and some neighbors over some period of time, what does that look like? And so what I'm wondering is, have we ever done a county-wide regional convening with whoever, frankly, is interested, CERT or neighborhood leaders, around emergency preparedness as a county? Have we ever sponsored anything like that?
I'll say yes, in 2 or 3 ways. The first way is that our Emergency Operational EOAC, Emergency Operational Area Council, I think I got that right, is served by an advisory body called the Operational Area Signatories, made up of the emergency managers for each jurisdiction. A subcommittee to that, to some degree, I think it's an advisory body, yeah. The CCLT, which is the City CERT Leadership Team, which is made up of all the CERT leadership from each jurisdiction. And they meet every month right before the operational area signatories meet, and then report out to the operational area signatories on their collaborative efforts to kind of, as I was saying about emergency management, raise the commonality and the consistency of operations and the bar of competency for those various CERT teams. So in that one form and fashion, yes, the CERT leadership all comes together. There's also an annual CERT exercise that takes place for the whole operational area, where those CERT teams come and exercise. I believe
and the whole operational area being the county as a whole.
Correct, with all the jurisdictions within it. I believe the last exercise was at Moffett Field for those various CERT teams. It was a phenomenal exercise, full-day exercise. There's also
and that's all jurisdictions. So that means how many people on average participate in a day like that?
That's a great question. I don't have a very specific answer for you.
Dana, could you put your mic on? I couldn't.
My apologies. I don't think we have a number for you today, but we certainly could find that out.
Yeah, I'd be interested in just how deep we get into the communities, and so that's partly why I'm asking. And the other thing I'm curious about is that we have a lot of the ham radio folks that I think some of them are their own. I mean, they're their own entities as well. There's just a lot of them who still appreciate those radios and understand that really from an emergency perspective. Are the ham radio operators, on average, if I'm talking to those groups, am I also talking to the CERT team in those neighborhoods and communities as well?
It's like a Venn diagram. Some of them are CERT members.
Okay.
Some of them are not. They choose to be or not to be based on their own personal proclivities.
But that's part of the training as well, right? Using equipment that is not going to go down and necessarily in an event of a...
Two separate curriculums.
Yes.
Yes.
And I will tout that the Aries Races folks in our county, we've got one of, if not the most robust county Aries Races amateur radio operator program countrywide. They compete countrywide and have, as a county, I don't know how to say it, won over entire states. Yeah, so that's a pretty robust program. The CERT program has one very small module on the use of radio communications, and then they're referred to the Aries Races program should they want to get more involved in that program.
Interesting. So is well, just two other things that I'm curious about. Have we ever looked at thematically trying to work with National Night Out to have a theme be emergency preparedness countywide?
I would say absolutely. That's
Yeah,
always
I've not seen that.
We have participated.
No, I know we participate. Here, what I'm asking is that often they give NNO a theme, and I just wonder if we've ever approached the NNO, because it's a national movement, but in our county it's really a strong movement, and it's actually one of the few times I see everybody, like from all different neighborhoods, really come out, and that in some cities, and even in the city of San Jose, some of the neighborhood or the districts that are lowest income, more higher need, have started to have more and more successful NNO events. And I just think it would be an important opportunity for us to think about a role we could play countywide to really have conversations with neighbors on that night, because it tends to be those activists, the people who host those events at their homes are activists or they're emerging activists, and they have a lot on their plate. But I think I'm looking for opportunities to insert the emergency preparedness, because I think, frankly, I'm so nervous about climate change and I'm so nervous about fires that I am really convinced that we have not done enough to change the rubric from government's going to be there and do everything for you to no, we're going to have to help each other. We're going to have to help ourselves. And I do not think that message has come out. National Night Out would be an ideal time to do that, because it's all about neighbors helping neighbors.
I think you're absolutely right. I would also point out that our recent addition, which we're very, very thankful of our lead emergency public information officer, Patty Eaton, she's been doing a phenomenal job of increasing our penetration in the social media area, in the web presence, and in pushing campaigns for personal preparedness. And the September National Preparedness Month is fast approaching, as well as the October Earthquake Awareness Month. And I know we have a number of preparedness campaign initiatives that Patty's working on, and we do every year. And we are always looking for new opportunities to try to increase our penetration and awareness of the importance of personal preparedness, especially as we continue to see the increasing of the gravity of events within our own state.
So two more issues I want to raise, and then I'll stop, and I appreciate everybody's indulgence in this. One is that, every year we have a county fair, and it's our fair, and we have, again, thousands of people attend it. This year is our 75th anniversary, and really under Dave's leadership, we're asking all the departments to come out, which I think is great. But again, that's something that, given the ham operators and others, that we might even do a celebration, maybe not this year, but next year, where we thematically look at how to engage these groups that help other people be prepared, because so many people are there just looking for information. I mean, some people just love to go to those booths, and that's what they do for, their X number of hours at the fair and eat a corn dog. So I think that there's enough infrastructure already that would give us an opportunity to get over and above. And I think Patty's really talented. I think this is beyond one person. And so I think we got to make this a very core part of living in this new world, is that. Here's the last thing I want to raise. I know that I've read now a couple of articles in the Merc and the Cron about the rolling blackouts that PG&E is announcing. And it's created, for me, a sense of urgency around telling people how to be personally prepared. And so I am really interested in getting your thoughts about the best way to help people be personally prepared now, without us creating panic, right? We don't want to do that. But I do think that this is an issue that we're going to have to be able to do a much better job of communicating with the public about how they're personally prepared. And what should our expectations be of PG&E helping us to help the community understand the implications of this?
So I agree with you 100%. And actually, we're meeting with PG&E tomorrow. So those are all the questions we have as well. And we've already been talking with the various public information officers countywide. So you'll see more of that come out in the next week or so, exactly where to go, where to get information. So more to follow after today. I agree with you.
So, Dr. Smith, is our last board meeting of June Tuesday?
Yes.
So,
well, yes,
yeah, in the July meeting as well, but
that's going to be held, I think, to just one subject. But
right.
Go ahead.
Well, what I was hoping to do is maybe do it during your report out. You could give us feedback about the meeting that the staff is having with PG&E on Friday. And the reason is I very specifically would like us to be able to say to the board, here are the steps that are being taken on the personal preparedness. Here's what we'd like the board to do. So, for example, whatever that pre-packaged, here are the things you're going to need. Here's what, we're announcing the fact of this. And
sure, we can do that.
Yeah, and how do we get it out to all of our, between the 5 of us, I think we've got some pretty rich databases that can get pretty deep in the community. But I just want to make sure we don't leave June as a board without at least saying, here's the main areas that we're going to be communicating, and here's what we're communicating. And the thing that I think is the most important on the what is I have confidence that our teams are going to do the back of house, the coordination with the fire departments and the police departments. That I feel like we don't have to think about that. But this idea that we really want the public to be ready, to know what they need, and to think about it in advance of an announcement of a blackout. Because what I'm worried about is when those announcements start happening, that we want the public to already be prepared and not respond in a panicked way, depending on how large those blackouts are and when they will be announced. And we don't know, right? We don't know those.
We'll do that. Yeah, PG&E doesn't know also, which is a little scary, but we will report it out on Tuesday.
Thank you.
Well, all great comments. Just on the National Night Out one, it may be, there's so many of those, which is a good thing and a bad thing, but but I think for one thing, all the organizers are published. The public safety folks have access to that, so to the contacts and so forth. I do think there's a tremendous opportunity there along the lines of what you were talking about at a minimum of doing sign up for subsequent training, and community meeting kinds of opportunities where you'd pull 3 or 4 national night out communities blocks into a single meeting like we had the other night out at Foothill Presbyterian. In other words, it's a lot easier to go out there and just say who's interested, since we have public safety officers at almost all those anyway, and even if they're from PD or whatever, how many would be interested in having a meeting and have some kind of a sign-up methodology as opposed to actually trying to do, to do that training at that block party or to give too much information out while they're sort of having the celebration. I think that could be a really big, and even if you couldn't physically get there to the National Night Out, like I was alluding to a minute ago, the organizers' contact information is publicized, so we could go back to them afterwards. I'm sure someone like Patty Eaton could figure out how to best put cohorts together of different 2 to 4 neighborhoods at a time that could be brought together. Who would have to organize those might be some help from the supervisor's offices or whatever, since it's sort of a constituent services thing as well.
I should point out that in each of the jurisdictions that have designated CERT teams for the National Night Out, many of those CERT teams do have tables and do take signups at those events to get those folks to come out to academies to get that additional training. I think I couldn't speak to the level of consistency from jurisdiction to jurisdiction on National Night Out for that.
I think that's what Supervisor Chavez is talking about. Why not just make it a thing? It's just make it comprehensive, not just hit and miss. Yeah.
I think we could take that to the CCLT, which is the CERT leadership team for the whole county and operational area, and recommend that for an item of consistency across the operational area. And I can't imagine that they wouldn't agree.
Well, please keep us posted about that. You can do that off agenda. We don't need that to come back to committee. It'll be too late anyway I think it's the first week of August.
August.
But our offices are open in the meanwhile between these committee meetings and between now and August. If you could let us know what further thoughts you have on that aspect, off agenda or by direct contact to our chiefs of staff, that would be great. Obviously with Supervisor Chavez kind of being the lead, it was her idea, but I know we would want to. I think our staff gets out to probably 30 to 40 of those, believe it or not, just from our supervisorial office. So we can help. I mean, we can be out there carrying clipboards so please let your staff know that's possible.
Well, we certainly appreciate that support, and I'm sure the jurisdictional CERT teams do as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Anything else? Okay, we're done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Keep up the good work. And I think we're done with the agenda, right? I'm seeing a clerk giving me the green light on adjournment. So we will adjourn to Thursday, August 15th, 2019 at 2 p.m., at which time we'll probably have Supervisor Chavez report out on National Night Out.
There you go.
All right. Thank you.